again.
Hello, we're live.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Tessers.
I'm Olivia Candosia.
And I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for so very, very many reasons. And Olivia is a qualified mental health professional. She is an intern therapist. But this is still not therapy for many reasons. What this is just an open conversation. Olivia and I are here talking with each other and with you all. And absent any other more specific information, we're just doing our best, as people are always doing, to make our guesses about who you are and what you might be interested in and what you might be interpreting from what we're saying and how it might be impactful to you. And if you are able and willing to participate in the chat, we appreciate that because it gives us more information to be able to make those guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and how we are coming across and what might be most interesting or helpful to you. So we will be talking about whatever we're talking about. Please don't think that you need to stay on topic or hang back unless you have something to say that's on topic. On topic is pretty much an irrelevant consideration when it comes to our conversations anyway. Now, before I did my very first,
It's too tall.
Before I started streaming, someone else gave me the suggestion that was brilliant that you have to be talking from the beginning because if you're just sitting there doing my work until somebody like an open office hours, whatever, I'm just doing something and if someone shows up they can ask questions or whatever, then that means when people pop in and they see you quiet, it's intimidating to be like, hey, and try and catch your attention. So we talk just to be talking. And we do our best to make that interesting and relevant and helpful. But we have only so much to go on. We both work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, and family and group therapy with people in the state of Illinois. People who are located in the state of Illinois. That is hopefully going to be changing soon. Well, it will be changing soon, but hopefully in big ways quickly, but nothing else in small ways. We also work with a couple of executive functioning coaches who can support people with executive functioning struggles anywhere in the world via the internet. This is public. You're here as a member of the public, so just to put that out, that's one of the many reasons it's not therapy. Comments that you make can be seen by anybody else. Although we do read comments out, or at least we try to remember to read comments out because we stream on 3 different platforms simultaneously, and each person, if you're on Facebook, for example, you'll only see comments from Facebook. So if someone on Twitch writes something, you won't see it. So we repeat it out so that everyone's kind of on the same page. I think that's it. That's amazing.
I think that's it.
Okay.
When you were talking about talking to talk and just sitting on a screen, I was thinking about all these other people who will live stream them doing their art or playing their music. But with the art one, sometimes it's just hard to engage with because the person's just working on their art. I don't know.
Well, I think that stuff can be, I haven't gone to any of these terms that you're referring to, so I'm just thinking conceptually.
Sure.
But I think that stuff can be really great as a body doubling kind of a thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So, if I want to be working on art, it might be easier for me if I put somebody who's working on their art up there. But yes, if it's from the lens of I'm trying to engage and have a conversation with someone, then if they're working on their art, I don't want to interrupt them, right? I don't want to disturb their concentration. So I don't know if what those people is doing is trying to invite conversation or not.
Yeah, or just advertise. I don't know. It depends.
Because that could be interesting. If there's an artist that I like or I'm interested in their art, then I could maybe tune in and watch them work on it.
Yeah, I tune in on indie musicians sometimes to see them doing their songwriting process. I think that's very fun.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
One of the goals that I initially had with this place and still have is to do a lot of that. We've talked in the past, part of the reason that I do this stream the way that I do and various other things is I don't want people to only see a finished product. So much of the value of the way I try to approach being helpful to people is so much about helping people to understand mistake, failure, that humans are limited. And so any any attempt to only put forward like a polished product reinforces this problem that people have where everyone's aware of their own limitations and struggles, but for everybody else they just see the highlight reels and they're like, why does nobody else struggle? Like, I want people to see me make mistakes when I make them. I'm not trying to make them on purpose. That would not be a mistake. That I'm wrong and I stutter or stumble over my words or have a hard time thinking of something or whatever. I say things in ways that once people interpret and respond to it, I'm like, oh, yep, that makes sense. That's not what I meant, but I see how it came across that way. I didn't think about it, and then I clarify. Because the whole point of all this is that you can't avoid that stuff. So I like it when people put their process out there to just show that, like, different situations, different contexts call for different things. And there are things where it calls for, like, the finished, polished product. Like, the whole reason we think of finished or polished as being a certain kind of thing is because being in that kind of way is useful there, and it has to be the end result of a process that involves a lot of not being like this.
You mentioned that that's one of your goals here. How are you doing that? What do you mean?
One of my original things, and I got pushed back and haven't come back on it, was for each therapist or coach that works at Effective Artistry to put up on the website examples of our own work. I mean, a lot of us are artists, so our art, like an unfinished.
You got pushback.
Yeah, people didn't want to put out like, here's a poem I started writing and abandoned a long time ago, or like, here's a video of me singing a song that I am learning, or because people get embarrassed.
Yeah.
But that's fine. I mean, that's more of a symbolic gesture. I think it would be more meaningful, or at least more accessible, but more meaningful or impactful to certain people who are approaching certain problems. The more important way is this way, the just being a person.
Yeah.
So much of what people are looking for in therapy and coaching is trying to not be a human without recognizing that that's what they're trying to do. And that's obviously impossible. Humans cannot be not humans. But when we see other people constantly behaving or doing or performing in ways that aren't human, again, that's the point of the fact that they're the end result of a process. You have to go through all this stuff. You have to have all this stuff going on in order for a human to be able to do that thing in that way. And people just think that that's how things should just be, and it shouldn't involve anything other than that.
Week in therapy.
Turn me into a vampire, because if so, that's what I want.
Back to the vampires.
Oh yeah, we talked about
Yeah, we did.
Well, it really depends on what you mean by vampire, but if you mean, an immortal being that drinks the blood of humans for sustenance and whatever, no. Not any therapy I am aware of that can do that. Being human's too hard. I want to be a vampire. Being a vampire sounds way harder.
Oh, being a vampire sounds so hard. That has scared me. That concept of being alive forever and ever and ever and ever.
It's a very, I think there's a reason that immortality shows up in our art and in our stories, like so much in so many ways. We have this very interesting relationship with the nature of our own, fun word that most people don't, finitude.
Finitude, okay.
It's like the now version of being finite.
Finite, yeah.
Our own finitude. We have a very interesting relationship with it. We don't like it, but also the idea of being infinite, we don't like that either.
Right.
Because of course we couldn't, because we are finite. So how could you possibly understand what it is to not be? Like you just couldn't, and we're aware of the fact that we can't. So in a way, it's just our way of exploring the fact that we don't know what that would be like.
Yeah.
I know the dietary restrictions for vampires are rough, but I'll take the trade-off. I mean, sure. I don't know. I'm one of those people that, like, there are exceptions to this. Obviously, I'm not incapable of enjoying the taste of food and whatever. But by and large, I don't care. Like,
you don't care about the taste?
Yeah, if I can like get the nutrients that I need.
Well, my boyfriend's like too, and I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I don't need food to be enjoyable.
For your normal like dated, like that doesn't mean that when I have a nice meal I don't enjoy it. It's just like,
yeah, it's not important to you.
If for breakfast I like put some paste in my mouth and it gave me everything I needed. Fine.
That blows my mind.
I mostly eat oatmeal these days, which is not that far from just being
paste.
Paste that gives you what you need. You'll never know if you can't be infinite until you try.
Can vampires only eat people? Is that the blood they can they take animals?
There is no consensus on these things,
okay.
But in most stories, at least many of the stories I'm aware of, other animals work just fine. Even in the original Dracula, like what's his name, Renfield, his thrall, it drinks rat's blood. This is now the Vampire Lore Podcast.
I have not seen Nosferatu yet.
I have not either. There's a series of books called the Dresden Files that I like, that is set in modern day Chicago. Mm-hmm. And the main character is a private investigator who's also a wizard.
Okay, fun.
His name is Harry Dresden. Dresden Files. It uses a trope called the masquerade, mm-hmm. which you see in a lot of different. The idea of the masquerade is that these paranormal things mm-hmm. are around us and have always been around us, but they are in some way like hidden from us, sure. normies, and various different versions of that. Right? Like Harry Potter has the masquerade, mm-hmm. that, like right. that's going on, and we just don't notice right. it. So it's that like all these stories that we tell and all these like tropes and whatever that we have, various different monsters and whatever. They're like our way of kind of remembering and passing along to each other some things that are true. So they're not exactly on, but like there's something to uh-huh. them. Anyway, they have many different kinds of vampires.
Different kinds.
In that series, they have 3 different courts: the Black Court, the White Court, and the Red Court mm-hmm. vampires. The Black Court is like the Dracula or Nosferatu, okay. like that kind.
The clowns. Which types?
They're mostly extinct because in this universe, the book Dracula was published as a way to like make the public aware of the vulnerabilities of Black Court vampires. They're the ones with the garlic and the crosses and whatever.
Uh-huh. So and what are the other courts?
White Court vampires feed on a certain type of emotional energy, and different families do it differently. Like,
what we do in the shadows, I'm thinking.
Oh, do they?
What we do in the shadows, there's a vampire that like sucks people's energy, and that is his like, yeah.
So there's like one family of White Court vampires that feeds on like lust, and one that feeds mm-hmm. on like rage and whatever.
Yeah.
And then Red Court is the one that's like blood and stuff.
So
Black
regular?
Court's like the death.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway. My friend and I both think we need some form of human dog food, like a space nutrition bar or pellets or something, if just so you can cook for fun rather than necessity. Dresden Files are high on my list to read. They come up in my orbit constantly. Dresden Files are fun. If you like D&D, I think you'll like Dresden Files. It very much like, without stating so explicitly, like in book 1, he's level 1. In book 2, he's level 2. In book 3, like you get that progress, he gets more powerful and more allies. And so it's fun. I would say it's like the fantasy equivalent of like a Clive Cussler kind of like paperback, airport paperback novel, like
sure.
Or James Patterson. Like it's not like really deep and thought provoking. That doesn't mean it's bad. I don't think all art is supposed to be super deep and thought provoking. It's really fun. Mm-hmm. It's very clever and well written and like well put together and stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's an adventure.
Have you read the Legends of Lattes books? It's like low stakes, people who like D&D, and it's like about a character who like she did all of her adventures, and then she like opens a coffee shop, and it's just like very relaxing, whatever. And I read the first one because everyone was recommending it to me, but it was cozy, sure, that's the vibe I was going for. But for me, I was in that mindset of like everything has to be like have meaning and depth, but this was just so like nothing's happening.
Well, see, so like meaning and depth, I brought those terms up, like obviously very open to interpretation what we mean by that. But generally people are getting at some version of like it should be it's a serious work of art.
Yeah.
And mostly we mean I think generally what people are referring to is either it should evoke certain kinds of emotions relatively strongly. That's one version of like it's meaningful. It's like, oh, it really makes you feel fear. Really but only certain kinds and in certain amounts. You know, like a horror novel is not serious and deep, even if it can make you very afraid or whatever. Or it's just got to be dark and bleak. That's something that a lot of people will use to be like, this is a serious work of art because look how bleak and dark and sad it all is.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's got to be kind of inaccessible or arcane or just like, you know, difficult to make any sense of for the average person.
Too much. House of Thieves, couldn't even read that.
That version is very much like a Emperor's New Clothes for me. They're like, hey, there's this brilliant work that everybody's like, I don't really get it, but the fact that I don't get it either means that it's nonsense and it has no meaning, or it has really great meaning and I'm just too dumb or deficient to understand it. And I go that second way and be like, it's over my head, but it's really brilliant art.
I've got books like that on my shelf where that is my belief. Like, if I tried hard enough, or I was someone different, I would understand this. But I'm going to have it on my shelf anyway.
I mean, there's a good living to be made in just knowing how to utilize the aesthetics of nothing I do will make any sense, but that's because you are deficient, not because it's not valuable. I was just pulling up one of my favorite Ursula K. Le Guin quotes yesterday about that. Oh, I would love to hear it. I've never actually read Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm very
Is that
aware of
another?
her. She's an author, fantasy sci-fi. Very like, I mean, the biggest series of hers that I'm aware of is the Earthsea series, and I want to say that was like 80s into 90s. So she's kind of that. I don't know how to phrase it. I think of it as like a foundational. It's not. There's that first wave of sci-fi. It's like Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and like all those in the like 40s, 50s, whatever, post World War II stuff. Or like Tolkien in fantasy, genre fiction. Like those are like the OGs or whatever. And then there's this like 70s into the 80s into the early 90s where there's this second wave of like translating that first stuff into taking it closer to what it becomes later. And she's in that category for me. You know, like a lot of people will have an Ursula K. Le Guin pull quote on their book. Be like, hey, Ursula K. Le Guin likes this. The trouble is that we have a bad habit encouraged by pedants and sophisticates of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, the refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. Ooh, I really like that. I'm going to have to try and clip that, copy and paste that up, Bruce. I think that's great. Yes, I love that.
And now I'm sitting here like, I kind of understand what that means, but I would need to dissect. Like, I can't process it as quickly as I'm seeing you do it.
We have a bad habit of thinking of happiness as something stupid. That part is fairly clear. That habit is encouraged by people who are trying to get us to think of happiness as being stupid. That only pain is intellectual and only evil is interesting. So it's really just the last sentence that you were parsing. This is the treason of the artist.
Yes.
She, in this quote, this I'm interpreting it, I could be wrong, but what she's saying is that there are artists who refuse to admit that evil is banal and pain is boring, that try to treat these things as though they're intellectual and interesting and meaningful, and that when you do that, that is a treasonous thing to do as an artist. That if you refuse to acknowledge that the banality of evil and the boredom of pain, that you are being treasonous as an artist.
Gotcha.
As a therapist, I discuss a similar concept a lot, but I really like that quote. I come at it from a different perspective because as with so many things, when we identify something that like doesn't make sense to us, the way we observe something, and through our worldview or the context in which we're observing it, we're like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's wrong, or that's insufficient, or whatever. Then we focus in on like, why does this wrong or bad or nonsensical thing happen? And we come up with these deficient explanations. Well, because wrong and bad people like try to make it happen or whatever. And not that this quote is saying that. This quote isn't getting into like, why does it get to that? Because I wouldn't say that that's treason, because obviously it serves a function, right? Like
anything which is popular, and I don't just mean art, I mean anything which is popular, anything which is common that is optional, right? That humans spread when we don't have to. It serves some function. Well, I guess I should say everything that spreads serves some function. Because if we have to, it's meeting whatever function that we need. And I think that a big part of this is that humans experience pain and suffering. This is just a universal, all of us experience pain and suffering. And an inherent response to that is to think like, that sucks. Why did this happen? Why does that have to happen? Whatever. We come up with our
explorations of like trying to understand why these bad things have happened. And so bad things, pain and suffering and evil, they become very interesting and fascinating to us because we're looking for some explanation. Because the whole point of what it is to be a conscious human is to take chaos and impose order on it like it makes sense, which it does, but only because we are the ones that define what sense is.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a fascination with these things. And in particular, there's one particular narrative that's going to come away over and over and over and over and over again that makes sense, and there are some ways it can go better and worse, which is
that suffering is valuable. That pain and suffering is in some way makes you a better person or makes your life better than it otherwise would.
And what do you think of that?
I think that what happens is any experience which is painful for us, any experience of suffering, we go through that, and on the other side have the ability, if we want to, if we put the word, we have the ability to look at that and identify something about it that is beneficial for us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that made me stronger. Oh, I learned to whatever, right? And that is a true thing, or an accurate thing, at least, right? That if I were to go through some terrible experience and come out the other side and say, you know what, going through that really helped me to get a perspective on life, and because of that new perspective, I have done things differently and things have been better, right? No one can say that's inaccurate. It's not. And if we suffer, then it makes sense to try and glean from it all the positives we can. It sucks. That's the nature of what means that it's suffering and pain, is that we don't want it. We wish it hadn't happened, but it happened. So it makes sense, and it is valuable for us to look at that and say, what are the things that I can take from this that are positive, so that it's less crappy that it happened. Sometimes that even makes it so that it's like, well, I'm glad that it happened because of the things that I have identified as having gotten from it. The unfortunate thing is that can create or contribute to, certainly reinforces this premise that suffering is good for you. Yeah. That you cannot improve or get better without pain and suffering, or at least that you cannot improve as much as you could have if you had suffered more. And again, there's truth in that concept, so we can't just get rid of it, but it gets applied in ways and in places that isn't exactly true. And so we end up with this idea that suffering is noble, or at least ennobling, that suffering makes a person more noble. And that, I think, part of the more I learn about Liquid, the more I love her. It's from a story she wrote about a perfect utopia society where everyone was happy, but the continued existence of the utopia was completely dependent on the constant suffering of one child when he walks away from the Omelas. I think some of this art that we're talking about, like some things are just artful or inartful, skilled or less skilled applications of certain understandings, right? And so there is something to, like, I as a person, as an artist, have gone through difficult things, experiences of pain and suffering, and I can draw on that, take things from that, and make my art better, or contain some of that in there in ways that make it so that it is more impactful for people or more helpful, or, like a common one is that like other people who are going through what I've gone through won't feel so alone. But it could also just be, it makes it more entertaining for people that I can draw on things that happened as part of a thing that I would rather, with suffering or whatever. But sometimes it gets a little confused, or at least it comes across a little confused, as though it's saying, I've suffered a lot, so therefore my stuff is valuable. Not that because I am drawing on those things in a way that makes it inherently more valuable, but just like so much in our culture, and this isn't new, but so much in our culture of art is based around narratives and perceptions of the artist, that you like this album because of who the artist is and what you know about them and think and feel about them.
I saw a comedian, my boyfriend's a comedian there, he was performing, but there was one comedian that's like talking about his narrative about how like he had a really good life and like a lot of support, and that's not a common narrative for comedians. And it was so nice to see him use that, because I have felt like, oh, I had a pretty good childhood, and I sometimes I'm like, but you didn't suffer enough, you don't have like enough stories, you like I have had that doubt in my head of like, oh, because you didn't suffer you can't relate to people. Like,
well, it's not even, well, obviously it is. I'm not speaking to your experience. Obviously it is for you, and it is at times about being able to relate to people, but sometimes it's not about that. It's more about like, this makes me more impressive, or at least this means that you should be more impressed by me.
Yes.
And I think, and it's not like I have examples jump in my mind that I would want to go that path, because I'm not intending to like be critical of people, but I think that there are artists and or pieces of art, or at least art careers of people, if not the person themselves, that really lean into this idea that you should be impressed by their work because of how impressive the concept of who they are and what it is, whether or not you actually derive value from your experience of the work. In some cases, it can lead to entire like cultures, subcultures, whatever, of people feeling good about themselves for being people who enjoy this thing, even though other people don't get it or don't like it, which again is a function that these things serve. But yeah, I think it is, these are some of those nuanced things that are really difficult and somewhat dangerous to try and explore with people, because it is useful to a person to come to the conclusion that suffering is valuable or noble, that like, I am a stronger person because of what I went through. And you don't want to take that away from them, and you don't want to unintentionally try and express something that gets interpreted as, oh, you're, acting like this was a good thing, It gets interpreted as though you think it should be taken away from them. But at the same time, then you don't want to lean too far into it and leave it unchecked and unchallenged, because there are unfortunate ramifications for a person. This is the same way we talk about diagnosis, right? Where like there for people, for some people in some contexts, right? You get diagnosed with something, say ADHD, and it's so valuable for you to have that diagnosis. And part of the value of that is because now you're able to say like, well, this explains why. So what's happened is a person has struggled, right? They've tried to do things, they've attempted to do things and failed in those things. And they have felt badly about their inability or their failure to do those things. Sometimes there's also actual like ramifications aside from however they feel that things are worse in their life than it would have been. But in terms of diagnosis, it always comes back to whatever it is I am feeling badly about myself. Even if it's like, yes, my failure there, I failed to do that thing, caused some like observably painful, bad thing. I am feeling bad about myself for having failed and then caused that thing, in addition to whatever the bad thing is in and of itself. So then I get a diagnosis, and it shifts from this idea that people start with, it's like, oh, there's something, I should have tried harder, I didn't care enough, what's wrong, this idea of like some moral weakness or character failure. And it takes it and says, oh, okay, I'm not a bad person, I just have this condition, right? Or I'm not a bad person, my brain is just wired differently, or I'm not a bad person, I'm just broken, or I'm just sick or deficient, or different versions of this. So it causes me to feel so much better now, saying like, it's not that I was doing it wrong, like I was trying, like I thought it. I wasn't just being lazy, I did care. It's just that I can't. And that brings so much value to me, right? Problem is on the other side, if I have now found value in identifying that there are things that I am just literally biologically and unchangeably incapable of doing, then I can never do those things. Because if I ever do, then it comes back to, well, so I guess I could have done this all along, and I guess I wasn't trying hard enough, or I was too dumb, or whatever, right? So there's all kind of sneaky workarounds that people try to use here, which is great. That probably sounded derogatory to call it sneaky. It wasn't intended to be. Because again, some of those failures have ramifications beyond how I feel about it that are problematic for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I go from like, I intend to get to work on time and do my job and whatever, and I keep failing to do that. You start with, what's wrong with me? I'm so lazy, whatever, terrible. And I lost my job over and over as I'm thinking that. Now I get a diagnosis and it's, oh, okay, it's not about that I'm a bad person, so I feel better. And yet I am still incapable of getting to work on time, and I still keep losing these jobs. And so the real impact of like not having employment and not having an income, that still matters. The fact that I now think of it as a biological incapability doesn't mean that it magically doesn't bother me that I don't have money, right? So I still need to work to address that. But now, because I have gotten value out of identifying as being biologically and unchangeably incapable, no matter what I try, no matter what I know, no matter what I do, I can't do the thing. I have to, if I'm now going to make changes to it, I have to do a certain subset of things that I think of as like, there's only so many things that work for someone who is broken in this way, deficient in this way, right? Brain is wired in this way. Mm-hmm. So if I take medication and that helps, great, that's allowed, because it's like, yes, I'm biologically built differently, but I can use a biological intervention to allow me to be able to do these things that are observably beneficial for me. Mm-hmm. But there's a whole other subset of things. This is why I would say people are looking for like ADHD tips and tricks and hacks and whatever, even though none of the things that you get there are actually fundamentally different from like non-ADHD tips and tricks. You know, there might be things where like with a certain frequency, it seems like this kind of approach might work with people who have ADHD more than people who don't. But anything that would be in terms of like executive functioning or like that kind of thing, anything that would be helpful to someone with ADHD might be helpful to someone without it, and vice versa. Having ADHD doesn't mean that a common piece of advice like set an alarm to wake up in the morning doesn't and can't work for you. Mm-hmm. But it's a conceptual thing now. Because if I've identified that the reason that I have failed to do these things is because I have ADHD, and that means that there is something about me outside of my own conscious thoughts and efforts that causes me to fail despite my conscious thoughts and efforts, then I can only become successful at these things by manipulating those things that are not conscious thoughts and efforts. Mm-hmm. So medication or whatever, you know, or diet change or sleep change, that changes body stuff, not conscious stuff. So I can focus on that, get big into supplements and things like that. Or if I think of, as most people do, most people who talk about executive functioning, think of executive functioning as this like personified external thing. You know, I want to do X, but my executive functioning stops me from doing that. Mm-hmm. So now I can do things that are targeted at my executive functioning, because that's not about my own conscious thoughts and efforts. I've understood that my executive functioning is fundamentally different from other people's, and I can do these things that might cause it to be like other people's, and then I can be successful. And that doesn't mean that I don't have ADHD anymore. Mm-hmm. It just means I'm doing the things that an ADHD person. So now we get into accommodations and support. And a lot of it is just to defend this concept for, and again, not talking down on this, mm-hmm. but a lot of it is kind of is structured the way that it is, not necessarily consciously, but it just kind of comes out that way in the wash. It's structured the way that it is in order to allow a person to continue to believe that there is something fundamentally unchangeable about them, mm-hmm. and then change it anyway, mm-hmm. which is obviously like at cross purposes. But if I run it through a couple different little gates, I get lost in the way and don't realize that no, I am now changing something that I think of as being unchangeable. That makes sense.
It does. I don't know what to say back, but anything. Well, here I am.
That's part of Olivia's training. Part of therapy training in the way that I do it anyway. Training people to just say, be able to realize that they're aware of whatever they're aware of.
Mm-hmm.
If you think of consciousness as like, we refer to it as a space, metaphorically. It's obviously not a physical space.
Mm-hmm.
But in order for us humans to be able to conceptualize things, we have to use metaphor and concepts and whatever. So if you think of consciousness, your own consciousness, as this space, like a room.
My stomach is about to growl so loud I can feel it.
Oh, I heard it.
Yeah.
Interesting that you predicted, like you knew that was coming. I wonder what that means. Because stomach growling is just like gases or liquids or something moving around in there. So somehow you felt something building up. Cool. I don't think that was picked up on the mic or that anyone would.
No, I don't think so either, but.
Just in case you were self-conscious.
No. I just wanted to say something that was on my mind. Okay. And I'm also thinking about how you talk about like having each corner of the furniture on the rug and things and having things not be perfect, but a little off. And I'm curious about, you've moved this ottoman closer to you to use as a table, but how is that interfering with the space right now? What you're thinking about that?
Interesting. Okay, so just context for people who are present at the stream. You're referring to a conversation we were having last Friday with everybody, because we are now running groups, therapy groups, as well as some like artist workshops and things. And so we were meeting as a group and talking about how to design and run these group experiences. And as part of that, I was talking about this concept, which is relevant beyond just groups, obviously, but there was a book that came out not too long ago called Nudge, that the whole book is just about this concept that like there are little environmental things that make it more likely that a person goes in a certain direction. And I want to explain like so many things about all this. I'm trying to decide how far to back up, but maybe we'll just go where we go. I don't know if you remember having heard me or if I've said it in front of you, but I've said it on the stream a bunch, that to me, psychology, the science of psychology is
applied philosophy,
is antithetical to therapy.
Okay.
That yes, therapy is applied philosophy as opposed to applied psychology. Because psychology is a study of humans writ large. What do groups of humans do, right? So that's this nudge concept. So an example of this that people tend to be aware of is that grocery stores almost always are laid out in such a way that you're not forced to go through the like bakery and deli and fresh produce stuff before getting to the other things. You have other ways to go, but it's laid out in such a way that just if you're not thinking about it or making a conscious choice to do differently, by default you kind of just end up going.
Feels so rebellious when you don't.
And so that's this concept of nudges, right? That's what that book labeled it. So people sometimes refer to it that way in pop culture. It's like, if we move where we have the soap dispenser in the bathroom, like let's count and get a baseline of how many people wash their hands with soap before leaving this bathroom. Then let's move this soap dispenser to this place and now count how many people. And then we see, it went from 40% to 70%. And so these ideas, what they're referring to as nudges, is like you are not being forced or required or instructed to do a thing. But if we just change the environment or change the stimuli that is presented to a person, then that changes how they behave. And in this case, these nudge things, we're trying to target things where like we can intentionally make this change because we want people to behave in this way. So then we can work backwards and say, well, if we change this thing. Another example people have seen a lot is like, there was that staircase in whatever airport someplace where they put, they turned it into like a floor mat piano thing, where when you hit a step, it hits a note, and then tons more people start going up the stairs. Which like
so cute.
It is cute, and this falls on that example. At least falls under the category to me of like philosophy of psychology trying to explain something that's like obvious to anyone. It's like, yes, if you make it fun to go up the stairs, then people are more. That's kind of what we mean by fun. We're just talking about what do we think
would make it fun to some people or more fun to some people. So that's the idea, is that we all have a default response. Every human has a default response to stimuli. If we change the stimuli, the response will be different. In psychology, we're doing large-scale studies to see if we make this change, does the number of people who do it a certain way go up or go down? Unfortunately, that gets communicated to people as, if you do X, people are more likely to do Y, which is an accurate statement in that sense, right? Like if we put the piano things on the stairs, that means that more people do it than not, and we can use the language, it's more likely that people will go up the stairs if you make that change. But then each individual person reading about it or hearing about it tends to interpret that as, oh, so if I make that change, then I will do it that way. If I move my soap dispenser, then I will start washing my hands without even thinking about it, right? And these examples obviously are silly, they don't apply to each individual.
Right.
But so much of what individuals do, right? If I use a planner, then I will blank. Right. If I set alarms or reminders, then I will. If I use this app, if I do yoga, if I do meditation, if I sleep for 8 hours a day, if I eat this kind of food in this kind of a way, all of these are the results of studies, and those studies are valuable.
I'm just thinking, I went to Aldi today and I bought a planner, but I think I left it at the self-checkout.
That's a funny version of that story.
Yeah.
Most like online people who identify as being an ADHDer will tell you that they have stacks of planners.
God, and I don't even use it. I don't know why I bought it today. I have found a method that has works for me. It is not that, but it was there.
No.
And maybe it's a good thing I left it.
Well, this is the part that is psychoanalysis in therapy, where like this is where Freud started, was this idea that like people do things that like are at cross purposes with what they intend. Sometimes even, like I didn't hear it, but I saw the motion.
Yeah, I brought my lunch, so like I knew. I'm like, it's
Would you like to eat on the stream?
No, because I'm gonna have to like put it in the microwave. I'll do it after.
I didn't even. To me, I know this is silly, but I don't associate stomach rumbling with hunger. I mean, I do in like art, right? Like in a movie, if someone's stomach rumbles, that's a cue that means they're hungry. But for me, like I'm not strongly aware anyway of any correlation in my life that if my stomach rumbles, that means I'm hungry.
Yeah.
It's just like stuff is happening there.
Yeah. So
I don't make that automatic connection, and didn't realize that might have been part of what you were communicating earlier, is that you were hungry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realize. So good to know.
Yeah.
Just give food.
Yeah. Planner.
Yeah. So that was the psychoanalysis thing, right? Is like people behave differently. They behave in ways that are not aligned with their conscious intentions. I want X, but then I do Y, and that is mutually exclusive. I want to get good grades, and then I don't do my homework. I do other things instead of doing my homework. And everybody knows this. We all have these experiences where like, I want to do X or I want to accomplish Y. And sometimes it's a far out goal and we're not doing the things in the meantime. But sometimes it's literally like, I'm going to take a drink and I spill the drink. Like and mostly that's too specific that psychoanalysts and therapists are not taking a look at something like that. They're like, oh, whatever, you tripped, not a big deal. But it's the same basic concept.
Sure.
There's just this window where we identify it as like, now it's a psychological thing. Now it's self-sabotage. Now, like everybody sometimes forgets to set their alarm, but you forgot to set your alarm, and then the next day there was an important meeting and you missed it. So now if we can connect that to a few other things, we say it's self-sabotage, whatever. Anyway, therapy and psychology were never like intended to be mixed. That the entire purpose of therapy is that it is individualized to that specific, unique person who has their own things, their own experiences, their own thoughts, beliefs, etc. It is, again, it's useful for us. If I'm really tired all the time and I'm trying to figure out what can I do that might make it so I'm less tired, and then I hear, oh, on average, people do best with 8 hours of sleep, then I can say, oh, I'm only sleeping 6 hours a night. So maybe that's it. Maybe if I try sleeping 8 hours a night like other people do, then I'll feel better. And I try it and it works. And hey, I'm less tired. Great. Like that's why it's useful to have this information. Sometimes though, I try it and I don't feel less tired. Sometimes I actually manage to sleep 8 hours even regularly, and I don't feel less tired. Sometimes I intend to try it and I just can't. My schedule doesn't allow it, or I can't get myself to fall asleep, or whatever it is, but it just doesn't work. In that case, it no longer really matters to me. It's not valuable information to me that other people do best that way, right? So all these large scale studies, they're really, really useful as when you're trying to figure out how to make some change related to the contents of this study. It's really useful to know what most people experience, because that's a good first place to try. If you have no other ideas, like just go with what do most people do. And if that works, great. And it does a lot of the time. And if it doesn't, then move on. But that's not what people tend to do. People tend then instead, when they try that and it doesn't work, then they're like, oh no, I'm wrong, I'm bad. Because if I get 8 hours of sleep, I'm supposed to not feel tired, as opposed to that's what most people experience. We forget that humans vary from one to another. And this is why, like, psychology is the science that tries to answer the question of why people experience what they do, think, and feel the things that they do and they think that they feel. And it's given us so much information that's so useful, but it does not tell us anything. No one can answer the question, why does this specific person do that specific thing in that specific context or that specific way? That question isn't answerable. It's still, again, useful to have information to draw on when we're saying what's worth trying next. Anyway, so this concept of nudges.
Oh, yes.
Environmental changes. That's the idea, right? If we lay out our grocery store in such and such a way, then 60% of the customers go to this area first. It's not a way of controlling a person, but it's not an explicit statement. It's just an acknowledgement, an understanding of we respond to the environment.
All the Super Bowl snacks at the front of the store.
Sure. If it is hot, you don't wear a big sweater, right? Like, nobody would think of that as a psychological manipulation. We just respond to the environment. But there are some things that we think of as like not, as being a deliberate or psychological manipulation. When it's really just like you walk into a room and you get a vibe, right? You meet somebody and you get a vibe. Somebody, you sit down and you start talking to them and you just relax and you're happy to just talk to them. Sometimes you sit down and you relax, or you sit down to talk to them and you're nervous and you're worried about saying something wrong. Sometimes you walk into a room and you're like, yes, this feels comfortable to me. Sometimes, most of the time, none of this is conscious, right? You walk into a room and you think and you feel and you behave in whatever ways you do. And that is, at least theoretically, right, impacted in part by the furniture in the room and the colors and the art and the way things are laid out. Even if you don't think of it that way, even if you don't think, oh, this room feels comfy to me, it impacts you in a way, and you think and feel and behave in a way that you only would do if you were in a place that felt comfy to you. So that's what I was talking about in that meeting the other day, is that an awareness that everything impacts people, whether you consciously understand it or not, it impacts them. That doesn't mean we can predict the exact impact and manipulate how a person feels very explicitly and deliberately by every little shift. But it's just worth being aware of. And then you do come to some conclusions, again, that are broad stroke. Like, I'm not the person who invented the idea that identifying a seating area by putting a rug there and then having each piece of furniture that you can sit on to have one or more of its legs on the rug so that there's a sense of connection there.
I see specks underneath a fidget.
You were saying that the other
Yeah,
day. You can get it if you like, or
I know,
I'll try
that's
to
what-
remember. Or like, you want to sit the client's seat so that they're facing the window and get to see greenery and nature, because we have studies about how that is calming and helpful to people. Or you want to have the client sit in a spot where they have an unobstructed view of the door, so they don't have any reason to feel trapped or whatever, right? And obviously, in a lot of cases, those two things are mutually exclusive. Pretty rare that there's a room where like the best view of nature through the window is also the side of the room where there's the door to get in and out, unless it's an exterior door, which is unlikely in therapy offices. Anyway, so yes, it's not the point is not to say so therefore you should only do things if you have a specific way in which you intend for that to impact somebody in order to do whatever. It's just to be aware that everything
does.
Right.
And it's worth having that awareness, even if you have no conscious thoughts about what that might be, because as you then are talking and interacting and meeting and working with people, here's a very common mistake that therapists and people make, but people tend to think therapists are better about this, and they're not. I think generally therapists are worse. Assuming that everything is psychological.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so stressed. It's because I think that I'm falling behind and I'm worried about failing and whatever. Where like, well, maybe the air temperature is impacting how stressed you're feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't tend to get taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm.
It's understandable why most therapists and most people would think this way, right? Because it puts things under our control. If I want a client to feel a certain kind of way, comfortable, let's say, with me, safe with me, I'm not trying to be, therapists are not generally trying to be like maliciously manipulative. I want you to feel safe and comfortable so that you can be open. I want to think that like I can make that happen by behaving in the correct way. That if I do the right things and say the right things, I can make you feel safe. And an understanding that like I can't control the barometric air pressure and that might impact whether or not you feel safe is useless to me. Mm. I think of it, right? If I'm one of these people, I think of it as useless to me because I can't do anything about that. So why would I pay attention to that? But for therapists, I think it's very useful to know, because otherwise, if you forget about that, just because you can't control it or manipulate it, then somebody starts feeling stressed and you forget that there might be other things going on besides just the psychological or just the interpersonal, and you focus in just on what are we saying, what are we talking about, what are we thinking about? And everything becomes about that. What's in your mind, what's in the past that was in your mind at some point and is now still impacting what's currently in your mind. What am I saying and doing? You get angry, it must be because of something I did. You get happy, it must be because of something that I did. Mm-hmm. For the most part, again, it's not an efficient use of resources in every moment to be like, what's the barometric air pressure today?
Do you know?
I don't keep track of that. I do use that partly because it's one that people never keep track of, and so it's like an obviously silly one, and it does impact people's moods. Mm-hmm. The higher the barometric air pressure, the more pressure is being put on your body, including all the tissues of your body. You know how there's that stereotype of someone being like, oh, it's going to rain because my knee is. That happens because the tissue in the knee is inflamed, and when the pressure is higher, that inflammation is compressed more and kept down. When the air pressure drops, all of a sudden the inflamed tissue expands because there's less pressure pushing in on it, and you become aware of that. It bumps against other things like nerves and stuff, and becomes more painful. Well, nerve tissue, including the brain, also can get inflamed and expand when the air pressure drops. In fact, this is one of, at least in some cases, let me say this because I'm not an expert in this. There are people who talk about that this could explain a lot of things about migraines for certain people. That a drop in air pressure, if you have some reason that your nerve tissue, your brain tissue is inflamed, and then the air pressure drops, and so then the brain expands enough to start to push against the inside of the skull, and that causes something. I've heard people say cold air helps you focus. But if it's cold in my office, I get very distracted by the fact that I'm slightly not warm. So I keep blankets in my office. But the office is moving to all hoteling desks soon. I thought that said hateling. I was like, what is a hateling? All hoteling desks. I also don't know what that means either. But soon. So I'm very nervous about what's going to happen when it gets cold.
What's a hoteling desk?
Yeah, what is a hoteling desk? Why would that change how you deal with the cold? But it's a good example.
What's a good example?
This idea that the cold helps you focus. It does, depending on what you mean by focus. And it absolutely makes it harder to focus, depending on what you mean by focus.
I, in my idea of what focus is, think cold weather helps me focus more.
Because what you are thinking of in this case, what you're using focus to mean is awakeness, wakefulness, alertness.
Yes.
And yes, cold makes you more awake, alert.
Yes. That
is true of anything that is uncomfortable, right?
Warm don't make me, when it's hot, Brandon, I'm the molasses. I'm like.
When it is hot, yes, I guess I shouldn't have said everything. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Because there are certain things like heat where the biological response to that is to shut down. So in that case, no, you don't. But if you're feeling pain,
Sure,
you're more awake and alert, right? Any discomfort, which is not something that there's an inherent reason for your body to respond to it by slowing down or shutting down,
that
makes
makes
you
sense.
more alert. Same with danger, right? Like, it means you don't get your own desk. You have to reserve one each time you come in. Oh, which is rough for me as someone who does not work from home at all. But they assume every employee is working from home 3 out of 5 days a week.
So no decorations or anything?
This is a more common thing happening lately.
I know, every time though.
If we only have 20% of our workforce in the office at any given time, it doesn't make sense for us financially to have room for all of them. We should just have room for 20 of them. But,
I'm going to bring a purse with all my decorations every time.
But yes, sometimes, and if not, if they haven't considered this, it might be worth you discussing with your employer that there can be workarounds, right? Like storage cubbies or things like that, where you can keep some things at the office. If not, at least for this specific thing, it should be a fairly reasonable suggestion to people of like, hey, maybe we should keep some communal, you might not want to use a communal blanket or whatever, but like maybe we should keep some blankets in a cabinet that people can use when they get cold, you know.
Space heaters, something.
Yeah, worth exploring. Also, if you're there every single day, it also seems reasonable to have a conversation and say like, well, I am there every day. Can I just have the same desk every day instead of having the additional thing of having to like request a desk every day when I'm there? But I don't know, maybe your people are not reasonable or not approachable. That's, oh, cold. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Anything that is painful, including cognitively, right? When you're stressed, you're more awake. When you think you are in danger, when you're afraid, it's hard to go to sleep when you're afraid there's a monster in your closet, right? Like, so that's what people mean by focus in that sense. And it is true. And it is true of you too, Best Insider, and everybody, because that is a built-in biological response that like, if things are bad, we should not go to sleep. Except for a certain subset of things that when it's bad in that way, the best thing for us is to go to sleep. Like we're sick or whatever.
I'm going to be very upset if I can't keep my decorations and blankets and fidgets and reference books and snacks and backup supplies.
My little stained glass birds my sister made. That was cute.
That is really cute.
Yeah, I hope you're able to talk to your employer and just say like, can I just reserve this desk for the next like 7,000 days? Or whatever, you know? Anyway, now Best Insider in this case is using focus in a different way. That is also a common use of the word, which is my ability to dedicate as much as possible of my attention to this task. And in that sense, again, you're right, cold is a distraction, as it is for everybody, because this is also biologically built in, meaning attention is finite. Any attention which is going to one thing cannot go to another thing. If I notice that I'm cold, that means attention is going to the temperature. Now, some people might be
Sorry,
cold.
the comment is so funny to me.
What's that?
The comment made me laugh.
Oh.
For eternity.
Fast desk for eternity, reserved for the foreseeable future. Yeah, I reserve it until I no longer work here. Like, anyway. Now, what is possible, and this brings us back to the nudges thing. A lot of different things play into it. That's why I like this example. What is possible is that a person could be cold enough that it makes them more alert and awake, but not cold enough that they are consciously noticing the cold. In which case, it doesn't distract them in the sense that you're talking about. It doesn't pull my attention away from what I'm doing because no attention is going to the cold. I'm not noticing it, but I am more alert and awake. Now, the assumption that being more alert and awake is beneficial is a flawed assumption, which we can talk about. But this is the other piece that I like this example because it brings into me, is this assumption that our culture has, this premise that we have that feeling bad is good for you and feeling good is bad for you. That being less comfortable will make you more productive, which is generally not true. Even in the sense we're talking about where being less comfortable makes you more alert, generally does not make you more productive. we have to obviously be very clear about what specific things we're talking about that we're calling being productive, because there are some things that you are better suited to perform or do or whatever. But generally, no, because even in the cases where, you know, discomfort that makes you more alert or whatever does improve performance, that's almost always a short-term gain. Makes what you're doing less sustainable, and optimal productivity is sustainable. So, in other words, like, okay, I've assigned this person to, I don't know, file these things alphabetically, right?
Mhm.
And they are doing it at whatever rate they're doing it. They're paying whatever amount of attention, whatever. If I make them more uncomfortable, depending on what I'm doing, I can make them file it faster, right? For example, if I threaten them and say that if they don't get X number done, which is a faster rate than they were doing, by whatever time, then they'll be fired, or then I will kill them. You know, like
Mhm.
threaten to kill somebody, and all of a sudden they're going to file really, really fast.
Mhm.
But how are they going to do tomorrow?
Mhm.
Right? That initial rate, theoretically, is more likely to be optimal because we have all these systems built in to monitor like our resource expenditure and whatever. So if we are focused, if we're motivated in the sense of incentivized, then we theoretically are going to find the optimal rate for sustainable productivity. Now, there are times where I don't need you and you don't need, like, there is no inherent reason to focus on being sustainable. This is a one-time task, we just get it done. And in those cases, it makes sense to try to do things that like override those processes and say, put more resources in now and then you can rest later. But generally speaking, we're talking about sustainable productivity. If I'm wanting to do more now, then I have to rest more later to make up for it. So we want that optimal, like I'm doing as much as I can today while getting back, blah, blah, blah.
Mhm.
I don't like saying as much as I can, but in this context. Yeah, boss, I need these little glass birds. They're essential to my productivity, and their names are Henry and George, and they live here. If your boss is any good at their job, and I will acknowledge that many bosses are not very good at their jobs. I guess I shouldn't say any good. If your boss is good enough at their job to hit this threshold that I'm about to say,
Oh my God, Brandon.
then they will know that actually, yes, those glass birds, while you wouldn't maybe make the claim essential, are beneficial to your productivity. That you having those glass birds is beneficial to you and therefore beneficial to the company. Again, benefits of large scale studies. We have lots of studies at this point that show that like making people happier and more comfortable leads to better outcomes.
Mhm.
That this management style based around fear, this idea of like, get this done, doesn't work very well. It does in a moment, but it's short-sighted. You get a lot of turnover.
Mhm.
You get a lot of brain drain. This is a lot of what's happened over the past few years, especially. At first they called it the Great Resignation, and then they came up with different terms for it. Where like, once there was a little bit of freedom and flexibility, once remote work became an option, well then I can now look for a job at any company, right? If I can work remotely, it doesn't have to only be a company that I can currently commute to, or that if I was going to move is in a location where I would enjoy living and being able to commute. Well, if I'm the employer and all of a sudden you can have a job with any company, I am now not just competing with the other companies in this area, I'm competing with every company.
Mhm.
So what does that do to me is all of my best and most valuable employees go get better jobs elsewhere with people who treat them better. There's two ways to respond to that. Obviously the better one, and what many people figured out, is to make this an enjoyable place to work, to make it so that this is the one you want. You don't want to go elsewhere. Another one that many people have chosen to go this route, including the incoming, I guess, new administration,
Mhm.
is to try and scare people and remove from them those options again.
Mhm.
No. You can't work remotely. You have to be in office, because now I don't have to compete with those people over there
Mhm.
to make your work life better for you, or more enjoyable, or sustainable, or pay you better, or treat you better. Again, over and over and over and over and over. Like, I couldn't tell you how much research we have on this.
Mhm.
The better outcomes come from the more sustainable practices. Those other practices, the slash and burn practices, the high turnover practices, they give you a short juice, like a bigger bump, but those are all based around people who are intending to leave that company, which a lot of C-suite people, like, that's the career path now. Is I come in, put a bunch of stuff in place, our numbers bump up for a year, and then I'm out and go get a better job because look at these numbers I just got up. And as soon as I'm gone, everything crashes, which for me is great because I just get to say, like, look, see, as soon as I left, everything crashes. And really, everything crashed because of everything I did there.
Anyway. Can't fathom.
I can't fathom how anyone would not consider the problems with not allowing your employees any control over their workspace. They're also giving us much shorter cubicle walls, which according to the boss who has a door on their cubicle and big windows in their office is a good thing because the office will get more light. I thought we disproved open office concepts a few decades ago. To some extent, I mean, it again depends on exactly what you mean by open office in different contexts and different trades and whatever. But generally, yes, people enjoy having privacy. Again, that's, I don't want to like go too far in on, because I was going to talk about certain management practices and things, but I don't know your boss, and I'm not trying to talk about your boss. This isn't about them, even though some of it might be applicable to them. There's an entire professional segment that we refer to in our culture as middle management, meaning that your job is not to do the actual labor of producing whatever it is that makes the company valuable, but your job is also not to be the person whose ideas and vision and ability to network and whatever is part of what then guides that labor and makes the company valuable. Your job is to get direction from your superiors and then make your subordinates do what your superiors want them to do. So that's what generally we call middle management. I know people might use that term to mean different things, but that's what we're talking about, is that your job is to get your reports, your subordinates, your employees to do whatever your superiors have told you that you are supposed to get them to do. And it's not a very, generally speaking, it's not a very pleasant job. You don't have the freedom in the agency to be able to weigh in on like, no, I think this would be a good idea. I think that you still just have to do what you're told, but what you're told is how to make other people do it. And there's a reason, like inherently there's a reason for that because of scaling, right? If we have 10,000 employees, then yes, like we don't want it to be like the people who set the direction and then direct labor. We need some like channels of communication to be efficient. But there's also this other reason that isn't inherent, but is now just part of how mostly it goes, which is if I, in the upper levels, think that there would be something that's beneficial to the company, but that people will hate it and not want to do it, it's beneficial for me to be removed from having to actually tell people and get them to do it. I make it your job, and you now are afraid of not hitting your target numbers, and you have to do it. And your employees can get mad at you, but your whole job is basically to deal with that. And worst case scenario, even if you're nice, you can be like, well, look, this isn't coming from me. Like if we don't hit our numbers, we're going to get whatever.
That sounds awful.
It generally is not enjoyable. There's a reason so many middle management people are just kind of, people will use terms like petty tyrants and whatever, but like just kind of unhappy in their work. It's not nobody gets into any industry coming from a place of value and passion and personal meaning to be like, what I want is to have very little agency or control over what I do, but also not to produce anything meaningful myself, but just to make other people do stuff they don't want to do because I'm being told I have to. It's just not a...
Right.
But yes, that segment, which is a relatively large segment of our economy, really, in acting terms, there's kind of this like stereotype or trope or whatever that when you go to see some Shakespeare play, it's never like, here's Romeo and Juliet. It's like, here's Romeo and Juliet in 1920s gangster Chicago.
Right.
Like, here's Merchant of Venice in the Wild West.
For sure. Outer space.
And that happens in large part because those Those plays have been done so much, so many times. And there's a director, right? The play has a director. And that director wants to have something to do. And so, like, the director's job, among other things, part of a director's job is not very glamorous. It doesn't match with the like artistic. It's just to like be the manager. Is to be in all the meetings and make sure that people are communicating the right things to the right people and people are hitting deadlines. And like part of being a director is just straight up management and administration. Part of being a director, yes, is like you have the vision. And honestly, a lot of the time in theater, your vision isn't really so much an artistic one, just as it is that like someone has to be the person with a cohesive vision. Someone has to be the person that like knows what's going on with the sets and what's going on with the actors, and because this all gets built differently and then comes together, somebody has to coordinate that. Otherwise, you're going to end up later on being like, well, we were doing blocking here, and now you put this. You know.
Costumes don't work with this staircase.
Right. But a lot of that vision we would put under the category of like artistic vision. You know, you're taking the play and you're changing it, adding something to it that's within your purview, which for theater directors is very little. I think people on a film set, the director is the emperor. Like they do whatever they want, everything follows them. On a play, the playwright is the emperor. The director does not get to say, we're changing these lines because I don't like them, or we're going to cut that scene for budget purposes or whatever. You have to follow the script. I mean, there's a whole, like literally legally, there's a whole process. If you're going to change something, cut a scene or whatever, you have to go through a process to like get permission from the playwright to do that. And you can get sued if you don't. There's some high profile.
My boyfriend, his mind is always blown. He's like, you can't change anything. Like, you can't get rid of that line and make it something else. I'm like, no. He's like, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
So theater directors have very narrow room to like put their own stamp on something. And yes, the biggest part I would say, which I think is really valuable and important, but not every director feels that way about it, is that cohesive vision. You're the one setting, making sure it all comes together, and you make it come together in the way you're wanting it to come together, and that's the thing. But a lot of times people don't. It's too nuanced, I think. Sometimes they don't feel like they're doing anything. Another part that falls under that is like the actor's performance. You can't change the words they're saying, but you can mess with how they deliver those words to any extent. The playwright's not allowed to do anything about any of that, right? So there's a lot there. But yeah, when people are doing the same play they've seen 15 times, they tend to get really big conceptual stuff, kind of just they're bored and they need something to do. Like doing a really great, tight, well-performed production of Romeo and Juliet is like, yeah, but I've seen so many.
How is this in relation to what you're talking about? We're talking about
middle managers sometimes do the same thing, where it's like, I have to justify my role here in a way that I feel good about. Because I don't want to conceptualize my role just as I'm the person who gets the directives from above, make sure everybody does it, and then reports back to above about how it's going.
So what does that justification look like?
Well, I got to make some changes. I got to put into place some new programs. I got a new system for us, everybody. Or I got to motivate people. I got to be inspiring. And it's not that there's nothing to all of that. There can be, but yeah, it can end up with a lot of middle managers being like, we're going to do this new desk concept that's going to help everybody's part. In this case, I'm guessing, no, this is what they were told is going to happen, and they just need to sell it to you. Like, we're getting shorter cubicle walls, whether you like it or not. So it's better for me to be like, well, it's nice that we'll get more light in here, right? Instead of this person being like, I have chosen that we will have shorter cubicle walls because I think it will be better to have more light in here. But again, that's the role of these people, right? Like, they're not the ones decided to do the hoteling desk. That's coming from above. But they're the ones that have to deal with everybody's objections and explain it. So
we don't have anything like that here, do we?
No.
It's like
I'll make you get it somehow.
Oh, for sure.
No, small businesses don't tend to have middle managers.
Yeah.
Depends on the business and the structure of it, but we're talking about these different management styles. You know, you can group anything into two different categories in kind of way. But one of the ways people will group this up is that some people who start businesses are just, that business is their career, right? Like a plumber who has his own independent plumbing business, like that's his job. He's going to be doing it for the next 40 years. It's just he needs the structure of a business to do it. And if he's doing a good job and he's successful and he wants to grow in a certain kind of way, he can bring on other people and expand and whatever. But the intention is still always like that he's going to show up to work and do that job.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of people starting businesses that's becoming more and more common over time is I am starting a business as an investment vehicle. Like I have no intention, if I'm still working at this business 30 years from now, I have failed terribly. What I'm trying to do is build something that becomes valuable enough that I can sell it for a lot of money as quickly as possible. If I start a business and 6 months later I can sell it for $100 million, amazing, great success, right? And obviously you can imagine how those two different ways of starting a business would lead to different practices. Because if I'm going to be working at this business, I want it to be a place that I enjoy working. If my goal is to sell it, I don't care if it's enjoyable. You'll hear all these successful founders talking about their, especially in the tech industry, talking about their successful exit, saying like, yeah, we slept on the floor and we worked 120-hour weeks and whatever. Which, like, yeah, because what you were trying to do was spend 6 months to a year building something, sell it for $2 million, and then stop working. And if you told pretty much any average American, like, you're going to work for 6 months, you're going to sleep on the office floor, you're going to eat, drink, and breathe your work and nothing else, but at the end of it, you'll never have to work again. Most people will be like, yeah, okay. Like, that'll suck for 6 months, but happy to do it. These people are bragging about it like there's something unique about them. They have some kind of work ethic. No, it is a lottery ticket, right? They're not guaranteed the payoff, but they're just paying the cost of that lottery ticket that if it pays off, it's great. So no, we don't have anything like that here because we're the kind of small business that, like, I'm not trying to sell a thing. Right. This is my job.
Yeah.
As we were just talking about with the middle managers, it would kind of suck to be somebody who, like, everybody you work with kind of hates you. I mean, The Office, the show The Office, is, like, I think brilliant in many ways and hits a lot of chords. But one of those is that it really deals with the, like, isolation and loneliness of being middle management in a way, and with a performer who can make it not so bleak. Like, the reality of it is just sad. If you think about, like, if you ever worked at fast food, what was that like? You know, middle-aged general manager who doesn't want to be there, doesn't like their job. What did they seem like? You know, it's not funny. But Steve Carell and that performance and that writing, they do a good job of, like, yep, no, he is miserable and lonely, and everybody hates him and he's a joke, but he doesn't get it, and so it's mostly funny. But then you start to feel bad about the fact that he doesn't get it, and then you get a little scene of, like, oh, see, he's super competent. Don't worry about it. You know, like, they pace it just right. But yeah, no, can you imagine showing up to work every day and you know everybody there hates you? They're friends with each other, but nobody likes you or wants to be your friend. In fact, a good portion of their friendship, you know, is built on the fact that they both hate you.
Yeah.
Sucks. Anyway, so yes, we've disproved a lot of these things, but a lot of times people just being like, I need to demonstrate value here. I need to come in and be like, we're doing this new system. Partly because it could be from a good place, right? Like, I actually want to make things better for my employees and for the company, and I think this new thing will be better. Sometimes it's just, I want my superiors to be impressed with me, and I want to juice up our numbers so that I get rewarded.
That would be me if I was in middle management.
Yeah, this is why getting a new boss sucks in most of these cases, because the new boss is going to want to do a whole bunch of things different, because the whole career path of middle management is like, I do the same thing as every other middle manager, but I have my own way of doing it, so it's better.
Right. And
so they don't come in and learn how do things work here. They come in like, this is how things are going to work here. I'm exaggerating, not everything's like. Again, newer style of management that is very thoroughly researched and well known in industry that it's a better way is the manager is there to make things work better for the labor.
Makes so much sense.
Yeah, obviously. The thing is, man, I'm just making all kinds of connections, and it's sounding like I'm like saying this is a known truth probably, but I'm just like sharing some of my thoughts and connections. Problem is, in order to do that, you have to acknowledge that what they're doing, what your employees are doing, is more valuable than what you're doing, and that the value that you have is in helping them, which,
depending on how you think about these things, and in our culture, there's a certain way of thinking about it that we can get to. But depending on how you think about these things, that might make you think, well, they're better than me, and I'm worse than them. And people don't like that. Like, I don't do anything of value. It's all them that do the value, and I'm here to help. We think I'm helping means like I'm lower than or less than. That we got this twisted idea that leadership is about being better than, and the people you lead are there to help you, because you're the source of the value, and they need to help you be as valuable or generate as much value as possible, which is absurd. Because again, the whole point of being a leader, like, okay, go be by yourself without anybody and provide value. Then you're not providing value as a leader, are you? Not that you couldn't do something valuable in that context, but whatever it is would have nothing to do with leadership. So the only thing that makes leadership valuable as a skill set is understanding that it's other people that will do the valuable stuff, and the value you bring is in helping them to do that better. Which is, you could say, a subtle shift or a psychological one, but it has real ramifications in how you go about doing this stuff. Employee turnover is so expensive. Often. These organizations, large companies these days, are bloated like crazy, and everybody knows this, right? Like right-wing elements will talk about, oh, there's all these people that like, we have 10,000 people doing this job that could be done by 3 people or whatever. Part of the reason for that is this turnover thing. You treat your employees terribly and you lose them, and so you need all kinds of redundancies and stuff. Plus, you now have set up a work environment. So what is the middle management's job? Whether they think of it this way or not, what I'm about to say is a description of their job. But depending on how you interpret it, it might have connotations to you that feel icky and you don't like, and you don't do that part of it, the icky connotations part. But that doesn't mean that what I'm saying isn't actually true. Middle management, your job is to get as much value out of your employees, your subordinates, as possible, while giving them as little as possible from the company. That doesn't mean that you have to be a person who doesn't want good things for your employees. Many managers want the best for their employees. But you are given a certain amount of resources to use for your employees, and you are expected to generate a certain amount of value, and you don't set those targets. You can argue it, right? You can say, we need more, I need to give this person a raise or whatever. But you are told you get this many resources, you need to get this much productivity. And if you want to do well and rise through the ranks, generally speaking, again, then how you do that is by spending even fewer of the resources than you're given, and or producing even more value than you're asked. You exceed the targets, you come in under budget. So whatever techniques you use, it's not about being mean. You can use techniques that make your employees' lives genuinely better. This isn't a bad thing inherently. Whatever you're doing, the end result of it is you're trying to reduce the number of resources the company is, and increase the value. Like, that's how a company is valuable. It has to make more profit than its expenses, or make more revenue than its expenses. That's your job.
I feel myself getting very tired right now. I'm feeling the shift.
Yeah. What that means is that if you are an employee, you are not middle management, but you are labor. You have 2 choices, whether you recognize it or not, and a lot of times people don't. Either you are in a constant negotiation with management. They are trying to get as much out of you as possible while giving you as little as possible. So your job then is to get as much from them as possible while giving as little as possible. And people will be like, no, that's not me, but I'll give some examples here in a minute, and people will be like, oh yeah, of course, everyone should do that. Or you don't do that, in which case you are now the person that's getting taken advantage of. And a lot of neurodivergent people fall under this category, where you are doing the bulk of your boss's work, but they're still the one getting paid the boss's salary. Or you are taking on everybody else's people fall short, you take it on. You're the one who's actually working 8 hours a day or even 6 hours a day. And you probably know this, right? You look around and you say, nobody else here takes this seriously. People aren't doing, if I'm going to do my job, I want to do it right. There's different ways of talking about this, but yeah, like, I'm not going to sit there and do a job and let it, like, it bothers me for it to be done wrong. But this is all just versions of you know they're talking or shopping online or whatever while you're working.
Oh my God.
But at the same time, you'll also walk away and be like, why am I not more productive like everybody else is? You know that the people you work with, you see them doing this stuff and it makes you angry. But then you still also have this assumption that somehow you are doing less, being less productive or effective than other people are. So yeah, you're the person that is getting taken advantage of. You're the person that the boss never wants to promote. Again, different bosses, some are genuinely nice and care about, but you'll eventually, it's kind of like the Peter principle. You have a nice boss who, hey, you make my life so much easier, you make this team function so much better, but also you're really great and you deserve better, so I'm going to recommend you for promotion. Cool. And then another nice boss who does the same thing, or you get an offer or something. Eventually you run into a boss that's like, you are so valuable and you make this team work so great, I am not letting you go anywhere ever. I'm going to make sure that you stay here working as hard as possible to make my life as easy as possible. So you end up in that situation.
It's Peter.
The Peter principle is that you rise to the level of your failure. It's a silly, very corporate speak thing, meaning if you get hired at an entry level and you do really, really good at that, you get promoted. And if you do really, really good at that, you get promoted. If you do really good at that, you get promoted. If you're not doing so good at that, you don't get promoted. So in an organization, you keep rising until you get to the point where you're not so great at it.
Who's Peter though?
I don't know. It's called the Peter principle. That's
I was
good.
thinking like
never
Peter Pan, and I was trying to put a connection there, but I couldn't find one.
Anyway, most people, we'll connect it back to something you and I were talking about earlier before the stream. Everybody knows they're wrong about stuff. Everybody. People might pretend like they're not or talk like they're not, but they know they are. It's not possible for a person to actually think they know everything. If you were behaving as though you knew everything, then you would not be able to function as a human. There would be no point to anything, right? Like, you know everything. Why would you do anything or talk to anyone? Right? So we all know that we are limited. We don't like it, but we know it. Including, we know that we're wrong about stuff. We know there's stuff that we don't know. We know there's stuff that, even though I know this to be true, I also know that some of the things that I know to be true aren't actually, and I'm wrong about that, but I don't know which ones they are. Oh, it was developed by a guy named Lawrence J. Peter, I guess. Thank you for the Googling.
Yeah.
Peter principle is a concept in management developed by Lawrence J. Peter.
It's boring to me now. I liked it before.
Again, me being me, doing the things I do. That's one of those things I'm like, oh, it's so close to like a real thing, close enough that of course it's a common concept because there's some real stuff that it manages to describe kind of by accident. And it makes logical sense, so you can't really use logic to disprove it. But I don't think that's actually what's going on. I think what's actually going on is that leadership is a skill set, and our culture, especially corporate culture, is set up to use leadership as a reward. That when you do a good job at whatever, you're a really great programmer, here, you get to be a leader now. But the skill set involved in being a programmer and the skill set involved in being a leader are different skill sets.
And then I was on the phone with someone who was asking me for directing advice, and they were saying, I'm so excited to like have, and I was like, to be a leader, and they're like, no, to be powerful. And I was like, to be powerful, my gosh. And based on this person, it was just bringing back so many things. I'm like, oh my God, you've always been like this. But it was a fascinating word choice between power and leader.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of those things, connotations, right? Language selection, whatever. But
and they laughed at the word leadership.
because to me, I like the idea of being powerful. I think anybody should. But generally, that word is used in a way that does carry icky connotations. Generally, we interpret that as like, I want to be able to do whatever I want, even though other people don't like it.
Yeah, that's what I was hearing in this.
Which there's something to that is what power is.
You're just thinking about which people like what things. You and I both also want the power to be able to do things that some people don't like.
Right.
We just identify those people as they want the wrong things and like the wrong things. So, you know. Anyway.
Apparently, the book it was first written about and was intended to be satire, but it was so on point. We talk about it in college courses now. That's funny.
Yeah.
I'd like to know more about that actually, because there's a lot of things like that, like Machiavelli, The Prince. Again, I'm not an expert, but from what I understand from experts, was satire was written basically a new prince or whatever, a ruler, whatever came in and he sucked. And Machiavelli was basically mocking him by writing this treatise on leadership, how to be a great leader, and just describing what that guy did as though this is how to be a great leader. So kind of like he'll like me and he'll be too dumb to get the joke that what I'm describing is a monster.
It's like back in the day when I don't know what, I couldn't give you a time, but like when performers would be making fun of the kings and the clowns would be playing like these powerful characters and the kings are laughing because they're like, oh, this is hilarious and goofy, but everybody else is like, oh no, they're making fun of you, buddy.
Yeah. Well, that's part of like, so leadership is a skill set. It also, when you get put into a leadership position, there are certain things that come along with that is separate from the skill set of being a leader. And then these things all end up getting kind of conflated and whatever. But
one of the things that comes along with being famous, whether that's as the king or the boss or a celebrity, is that part of the function of having famous people, part of the reason that there are even such a thing as famous people is for us to mock them. Like, honestly, fame spreads a lot more quickly by us needing to, like, I need to tell you about who this person is because I need to be able to mock them.
Right. That's different than the word Machiavellian, though.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, okay, great.
Machiavelli was just his name.
Great.
Pull yourself up by your bootstraps was a satirical statement because it's impossible, obviously. And that's the point. It's like, yeah, grab your own bootstraps and now pull yourself up into the air. You can't do it.
That's really funny.
And that's the point, is when people are saying, like, work yourself out of poverty, is like telling someone to pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Right.
The way it is, the nature of how it's structured, that's not how it works. But then people are like, yeah, you should just do that. That's important. Yeah. Just do that. Why? Because it allows people to continue to believe that they are in control of everything that happens to them. They're not. But as long as I believe that I can pull myself up by my own bootstraps, or that person could pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, then like, okay, well, I got my success by earning it, and they're not successful because they didn't do the right things like I've done. Instead of like acknowledging the literally innumerable variables and factors that have played into why I have the life I have versus any other. Terry Pratchett and his Samuel Vimes Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness. I like that one too. I learned about it in grad school econ courses. See, that book, Terry Pratchett is a fantasy author, which kind of brings me back to diversity. And so many open folders right now that I haven't closed out. Most known for the Discworld novels, you know, like he writes these books on this fantasy world. Discworld is, you know, it's a flat world carried on the back of a giant turtle through space, you know, like matching historical thoughts about. And it is all satire of various things. Sometimes he's satirizing Shakespeare, sometimes modern culture. One of them is just a satire of, more a pastiche, I guess, than satire of Phantom of the Opera. But Sam Vimes is his like hard-bitten detective, you know, walking the beat police character guy. But the Sam Vimes Boots theory of socioeconomic unfairness is not in and of itself satirical. That's an actual, he's just using that character to point out some, that's the point of satire, right? Is that we are using satire to be able to shine a light on actual real things that are ridiculous.
What's the difference between pastiche?
Again, never about correct, incorrect in terms of dictionary, because I could be wrong. Although I think I'm right.
I guess okay.
I think I'm right about the dictionary definition here, but I could be wrong. So don't just take my word for it. Pastiche is like you take some other thing that already exists, some other piece of art, and kind of make a mocking version of it. Similar, like almost like homage. Like I think the Scary Movie movies would be considered pastiches.
That makes sense.
Where satire is not, it's just about the nature of what you're trying to do. If you're doing something satirical, then you're putting something forward that is intended to be for ridicule. You present it as though it is not meant to be ridiculed, but it is actually meant to be.
I wonder if I've ever done that.
Satire?
Yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, I think dictionary-wise, satire only refers to like actual pieces of art that are created, not like things that person would say.
Okay, great. Because I was like, do people just do satire? I mean,
certainly people act in ways that are intended for ridicule while pretending that they're not all the time. My
Yeah.
wife and I do it a lot. We refer to it as like doing bits.
Okay,
All
that's
the bits
fair.
involve that, but
We do bits.
Yeah.
We being people annoy like.
sometimes, it's like somebody says something and you act as though you don't understand when you really do, but you convey it as though you don't.
That's weird. I've never thought of satire in this kind of context.
Anyway, his theory, Boots theory, whatever.
Mhm.
He's a cop and he walks the beat.
Sure.
He's talking about a poor man can only spend $5 on a pair of boots,
Mhm.
and then that pair of boots are crap, and they wear through in 6 months, and then you got to spend another $5 on another pair. But a rich man can spend $100 on a pair of boots, and that pair of boots will last them forever because it's high quality. So by the end of their lives, the poor man has ended up spending 5 times as much on boots as the rich man, which is just a thing that Pratchett was using satire to point out that it's real.
Yeah.
That there's an episode of the show Atlanta that also does a really good job of this. You watch Atlanta? Where like character that doesn't have any money, he's got like $200 or whatever, and he's like, I need X amount of money, and his friend's like, oh, okay, I can get you that, whatever. And then they go on this thing, they talk to this person, buy this thing, and trade it for that thing, and whatever. And at the end, they give some dogs to somebody. And the guy's like, okay, so when do I get the $500? And he's like, well, so he's going to breed those dogs and sell off the puppies, and about 6 to 8 months from now, you'll have $1,200. And he's like, no, I don't need money 6 to 8 months. Like poor people need money now.
Yeah,
they need money now. And that is the chief way of making money in our system, is to invest it in ways that provide small returns. So you need a lot of money for the return to be any like significant value, and it takes a long time.
Are you an investor? Do you invest in things?
In the sense that
like stocks and like things like that? Yeah.
Yes, I don't. I married a woman who has investments, so I have investments in that way.
Sure.
I have never myself actually put money into stocks.
Sure.
Not that I wouldn't. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But
I was just curious.
I mean, I invest in different ways, like in this company and stuff like that. But yeah, I'm not in stocks and bonds and companies.
Sometimes I get little like blips of like financial podcasts, commercials of like best things you could do to make money in the future, and I'm like, oh no, I'm not doing any of that.
Those things are also built on certain premises. One of those is there is no option for enjoyable employment, and that therefore everybody's goal is to stop working as soon as possible.
Sure.
And so the advice is geared around that. How do you make money without working? And that's very true for many people. I know there's a term FIRE, F-I-R-E, which is Financial Independence Retire Early, which is a silly acronym.
It's very funny.
I hate things like that. This is just my grammar nerdy thing about but retire early is a verb and financial independence is an adjective. So you're saying one adjective and one verb thing. It should be like become financially independent and retire early, or financial independence and early retirement. But that doesn't spell FIRE. So.
Do you like that it spells fire though? Like, do you like that it's the word fire? Like, I guess that doesn't make sense.
I didn't associate it with fire.
I just did. I was trying to find.
Yes, I know people who are like that. They're like, everything's optimized around, I'm trying to do this and this and this so I can retire in 10 years at the age of 46.
I wouldn't like that.
Nobody would.
Yeah.
Even the people who retire, they then just go do other work, stuff, but it might be work that they're not paid for, whether that's volunteering or working on their own hobbies or whatever. But yes, no, the best financial advice is to, and I want to be clear, the point of financial advice, as with any advice, is that it is not always usable for. If anyone could just do it, then no one would need the advice. That's obviously the choice that you would take if it was an option to you.
Yeah.
Now, if it's not an option to you, it can be useful for someone to point out that this is an option, maybe that you do have but are aware of, but more often that you could work towards making this an option. Because if it isn't currently an option, you're not likely aware of it. So I'm making you aware of it as something you can aim for. But anyway, best financial advice is just get a job that you love that pays you a lot of money. Like,
why do I need to worry about investing in this and whatever tips and tricks that if like I've got more money coming? Well, really the best financial advice is like inherit millions of dollars. That's just not. Yeah, like nobody actually wants to. When you're working at a job you hate, yeah, it's like I wish I could just stay home and like do whatever I wanted and not do it. If and when you get to the point where you can just stay home and do whatever you want, you'll very quickly be like, I need to go out and do something. And that's what is happening. The financial advice is for people who hate their jobs and don't see any, either haven't even considered it as an option or don't see any viable path forward for them to ever be able to get a job that both pays what they're looking for and that they like. Mostly our culture presents that as a choice. You can either do something you love or make the money.
Yeah. I should keep a scrapbook of my favorite worst acronyms. That's funny. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Marry rich.
I mean, marry rich is also great financial advice. Because inherit money, marry into money.
I remember.
Win the lottery. These are all good financial
My
advice.
dad, who's a doctor, had like his patients come over for a dinner once, and they were asking me what I was going to school for, and I said acting, and they looked at me like, oh my God, you're going to go to school for acting? And I just went, marry rich. And my siblings made fun of me forever for saying that to these people because they were like, I don't know.
Even though many of them probably did marry rich.
Right. It was so
You're
uncomfortable.
not supposed to say that though.
Right. But I said it.
Yeah, best financial advice, just somehow get a bunch of money without having to do anything about it. That's the best. That's why this other stuff, financial advice, again, not casting aspersions onto people's intentions. I believe very much, not that everyone, but that many, probably the vast majority of people are doing it in good faith to actually try and be helpful and are just, and it is helpful in some ways, like I said, right? Like making people aware of things that they could aim for and helping them with ideas of how they get there, whatever. But you're helping a narrow window of people for whom they have that option, but aren't aware of it. Which it's not nobody, it's not a lot. And that's a big part of the issue I have with things like that is that what actually makes people really successful in that, because the window of people that can do what you're suggesting, but aren't currently aware of the idea that doing it would be beneficial to them, in terms of advice, is very small. So you can't get very successful doing things that way. You can get successful by helping them do that, right? Not just saying you should invest in the stock market, but like saying invest in this thing now and this thing here, and here are things you can look at. Like that can be helpful to a much broader range of people. Still have to have the option to do it, but now you can help people who already know it's a good idea and just don't know how. But most of the people who hear the most, podcasts and whatever, maybe not most of the people, a lot of the people, many of the people are not helping you do it. They're just saying to do it over and over.
Right.
And so in that case, what makes people successful is not actually for your target audience, but it's for the people who really want to believe that the target audience that you're theoretically aiming at does exist. They're like, my worldview, I am much more comfortable with the idea. I genuinely believe that like most people could be rich if they just made the right decisions. That's functional for me. Maybe I'm rich and I feel bad about it, but knowing that other people also could makes me feel better.
Sure.
Then I really like anybody who's out there talking like, hey, if you just make the right decisions, you can be rich. Like, how do you become really powerful? Is you do things that the people who are already really powerful like.
Right.
This is not exclusive, but a lot of people who become very well known is because their message really appeals to the people who have the option to make you really well known, introduce you to the right people, and show you off at the right places. There are people who become really well known because they're putting something out there and people actually like it, and then more people like it, more people like it. But it tends not to come from the intellectual, like public intellectual sector. There's not a lot of people that like, not nobody. And it doesn't mean that this is bad. These things are still helpful to the people they're helpful for and in the ways that they're helpful. But yeah, you gotta, to get yourself help
self-published, you got to impress the people who publish self-help books, and you got to impress the people who introduce you to those people. And
I remember I followed, oh my God, whatever. I listened to a podcast called The Diary of a CEO, and they were getting ready to announce their book cover they're like, we've been working really hard on this. Like, we're so excited to show it to you. And I was really excited. They were pumping me up. And then they released it on Instagram on their page, and it was white background with just the name of their podcast in black text. And that was it. And I was so disappointed.
Well, did they give an explanation for why that is a very good choice for how they did it?
No.
It didn't match what you wanted, but
no, but I'm hearing what you're saying is like they probably were doing it because.
Well, it's kind of that joke of like The Girl on the Train and Gone Girl, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like all those covers are the exact same.
Yeah.
Because the point of those covers is to say, like, if you like these other books, this is that kind of book.
Yeah.
And self-help books.
But they work so hard to do a white background and black.
That's the intellectual self-help book these days. Yeah. Although usually there's a single image on there too. Like Adam Grant's Think Again is white and text, and then there's a flame.
Or like Twilight with the apple. Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah. So talk to your boss. Because what actually is true, like I was saying before, is everybody knows they're wrong. Nobody wants to be wrong. Another way of saying that is everybody knows they're finite and nobody likes the idea of being finite. Everyone knows they're mortal, but nobody wants to be mortal, right? If I know I'm wrong and I don't like the idea of being wrong, one of the things that will happen then is I don't want anyone else to know I'm wrong because I think it's bad to be wrong, right? If I didn't think there was any problem with being wrong, then why would I try? It wouldn't make me feel bad if you pointed out that I was wrong. Mm-hmm. And in fact, that's one of the things I try to help people with, both as a a supervisor and whatever, mm-hmm. and myself, is like, if you can separate out the idea of being wrong from feeling bad, then you just learn like crazy, because whenever somebody points something out or you get new information that lets you know you're wrong, you don't have to spend any resources feeling bad or trying to reject it, or just like, oh, thank goodness, I knew I was wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm so glad I have this new information, and I'm less wrong now. Never right, just less wrong.
Is that a learned behavior?
I can say that my experience of it has changed over time, and I have made deliberate attempts and done specific things that correlate with that change. Mm-hmm. Can I say 100% confidently that's why it happened or would work for the same for anybody? No. But
I guess I'm just thinking about like children and how.
Oh yeah, no, it's learned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how some kids like.
Well, for what it's worth, all conscious experiences learned. Right,
that's fair. And if you correct them, they like shut down.
Some more than others.
Yeah.
Girls more than boys, for example, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
There are reasons for all of these things. Mm-hmm. You can look at anything and say, I want this thing. And the flip side of that statement is, I am afraid of not getting that thing. Mm-hmm. And it's, in terms of the meaning, those mean the same thing, right? Like, I would like to go out for dinner tonight also means I would like to not go out for dinner tonight less, or I would like it less if we didn't go out for dinner tonight. Mm-hmm. So logically, there's no difference. The meaning is the same. Mm-hmm. And in our culture, we have a tendency to put so much focus on the meaning of what we're saying that we ignore that there's other stuff besides meaning, because there are different ramifications to saying, I would like to go out for dinner versus we never go out for dinner, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm getting the same point across, mm-hmm. but there's differences. And so I want to be successful is the same meaning as I don't want to be unsuccessful, mm-hmm. but there are different ramifications, including where your attention goes, what you think and what you feel and what you do in response to the things that you notice that shift. And that's why a lot of this language stuff will come across to people as pedantic, because it's like, it means the same thing. And I agree, yes, it does. Mm-hmm. But there are other things besides meaning. And so one way of talking about this broadly, psychologically in our culture that people love and put it out there, and everyone's like, yeah, it's like, are you ruled by fear? Right? And so many people, I don't even know what I want. I just do whatever other people want me to do. Mm-hmm. Or like, I make all my decisions from a place of fear. You know, like, it's one of these things that I know I'm wrong. I know there's things I'm doing wrong, but I don't know how. And then if someone's like, oh, it's because you come from a place of fear, it's like, yes,
for some reason, that one helps me to be like, yes, I'm wrong, and now I'm less wrong, without making me feel threatened or insecure about like I'm dumb or something. And so there's all these little windows that you can get a message across to somebody where it's like, see, here's a way you've always been wrong, and you knew it. And people are like, I knew it. But if just the slightest thing changes, then it's like, screw you, I'm not wrong. And you got to be very careful about language to get those things across, because language matters. There's a difference between saying I love you and I hate the idea of losing you, even though the meaning you're expressing is the same or similar. Anyway, the boss I'm complaining about is really my boss's 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 boss, so I don't think I'm going to complain to them. But I've been talking with my coworkers and boss, and I'm hoping it trickles up eventually.
Yeah, so what I was saying is everyone knows they're wrong. No one wants to be wrong. That in our culture especially, this is how theoretically would happen in any culture, but it's, I think, much more common and much more reinforced in our culture than it has to be, or than it inherently would be, is then I now view being wrong as a sign of some failing of mine that isn't inevitable, right? Meaning, like, if I'm wrong and then someone helps me to understand that I was wrong, then that means that other people were not wrong in that way. So the inherent assumption there is that there are other people, it is possible to not be wrong in the way that I am wrong, and other people aren't. So the fact that I am wrong in this way means that I am less than those other people. It's a sign of some internal deficiency of mine that makes me worse. So every time I learn that I'm wrong, that's like, oh shoot, I'm worse than I thought I was. And it feels really terrible. Again, some things I learn I'm wrong, and it doesn't filter that way of like, that makes me worse than I thought I was. Sometimes it's like, oh, or actually sometimes it's like, yes, that makes me worse than I thought I was, or it makes me worse in a different way than I thought, and I prefer this way to the other way. Like, oh yeah, I'm ruled by fear. That's much better than I'm incompetent, which is what I used to think.
Right.
But what people love is to be helped. And it's all, for the most part, language tricks.
People like to be helped.
Your boss's job actually does get easier. Their results get better. Their life becomes more comfortable as their employees are happier and more comfortable. Whether they intellectually understand that or not, it is true. And no boss is going to be like, well, I don't want my employees to be more productive and my life to be easier or whatever. Like, everybody wants that. So the trick is in how you can explain or get an idea across to them in a way that they receive it or understand it or internalize it, whatever, as this is something that makes my life better, as opposed to the danger of how it can come across to them is this person saying they know better than me.
Yeah, my boss at the hospital, she has like all these QR codes now around the space of like anonymous survey, or like fill out like how you would like to improve the department and like the things we could do. And well, that's not my favorite approach. I did fill it out because I'm like, there are things that I guess I would want. You know?
I mean, my job as a leader, you're any person who is performing the role of being a leader, because it's not an identity, it's a role, and roles have identity associated with them, but this one is no different. You're not a born leader or whatever, it's just a thing you're doing. I do, side note, I love that, like, some things we think of people as like, no, you're just born that way. You're born to be an artist. You're born to be a leader, but you're not like born to be a data entry clerk or whatever. You know, like,
right. That's funny.
It's fun. Anyway.
Born for computers.
So that's the trick, is to be able to present things in a way that don't give the sense of, I think, or that don't allow them to think this person's acting like they know better than me, or they think I'm wrong about stuff, because that will activate stuff, and it's more likely for some people to be impacted that way than others. But it's also more likely, you know, there are things we can do that make it more or less likely that that will be the outcome. And one of those things is, if we approach somebody from the lens of like, what I'm doing is a scary thing to do because they might think that I think I know better than them, that does make it more likely that they're going to interpret it that way. Because they're like, why are you acting like you're trying to, like, why are you so worried about whether you know something better than me unless you think you know something better than me?
In experience, I know.
So anyway, it's tricky. It's all tricky. But I think generally worth trying. And it's like when you're near a high ledge that's dangerous if you fall off of it, but you want to get as close as you can to see the view, right? You inch a little bit. You keep your weight on your back foot, and you like move your front foot out a little bit and test it, and like slowly ready to back up at any point. And only when that's a certain point, then you shift forward and you repeat. Same thing in conversation, right? Like, not that I'm trying to manipulate the conversation in a way like to get a certain place, but just that I don't jump straight into, listen, this is what we should do.
Right.
I'm getting a sense of like, I've been thinking about whatever, and see how they respond and just adapt. But yeah, no, this comes up all the time with people who identify as neurodivergent and asking for accommodations.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, like the way that neurodivergent people generally go about doing that, and people who identify as being neurodivergent go about doing that, makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Because you call it an accommodation, what each person is doing is thinking like, they're not going to want to give me this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want them to give me this thing, like I shouldn't ask for it because they wouldn't want to give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
But if I need it, then I'm allowed to ask for it. And that's what each individual is. That's their thought process. It's like, I wouldn't ask for it if I didn't need it. I need to justify it to myself as really being necessary. Otherwise, I'm a jerk for bothering them about it. But you're failing to take into consideration the other person's perspective, which is you're now coming to me and saying that you need this thing. And it's an accommodation that I have to give it to you, or if not, you can't do your job, or I've violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. Mm-hmm. Like right off the bat, we're starting it as you're not presenting a request to me or an option or informing me of something that you would like or that would be beneficial to you. You're telling me what I have to do. And again, a lot of people won't care about that, right? Like if somebody asks me for accommodations, I'm happy to do it. I appreciate when I've had people do that, right? In an interview, ask for like whatever kind of, I like it, and I thank people and make a point of thanking people for it. Mm-hmm. So it's not inevitable. But there's a good chunk of people that if you come to them with like, you have to do this thing whether you want to or not, it doesn't matter what you're about to ask me, I'm already like, no, screw you. Mm-hmm. Even if I do end up having to do it, I don't like you anymore, like. Mm-hmm. So this becomes a problem if you just were to go and talk to the person and say, like, I do a lot better with X, Y, or Z, or, I feel like I'm comfortable with, or it helps me out if I can, or whatever.
Too much noise.
Then it doesn't, you always have the option to escalate it further, eventually to the point of like, this is an ADA issue, mm-hmm. and if you don't do it, there could be legal action. You never lose that option, but you do lose the option to go backwards. If you start there, mm-hmm. you can't back it up and be like, oh no, you know what, it's chill. Like, so that's what I would say is instead of going from this place of like fear and like hesitation, like, oh, I shouldn't ask for this thing. If you can get to a place where it's like, no, it is, they might say no.
Right.
And it's okay for them. Let me be clear. I'm not talking about accommodations to say in all cases it's okay if they say no. Mm-hmm. I'm saying if your mindset for a particular request for your boss or for anybody, if the way you're thinking about these requests is people could say no and that's allowed, mm-hmm. then the bar for you to ask for it is so much lower. Mm-hmm. If you're allowed to say no without me being upset about it, then I can say like, hey, would you mind getting me a water or whatever? Mm-hmm. But if I'm like, no, if they say no, they're a real jerk, then I better really need that water before I'm going to ask you for it.
Yeah.
And it just turns it into, I am now somebody who no longer asks for the things that I need. So it works, it gets you further from what you're trying to do. You're trying to get more support and you end up asking for things even less and less and less and mm-hmm. less. So to try and get yourself to a place of any random damn impulse I have, I can ask, because people can just say no if they want to say no. Otherwise, you wait until you're dying, and then if they say no, it's a big problem. I didn't close all the folders, but we need to wrap up. We need to get back to the nudges thing, the psychology.
So many things.
Large-scale research applied to individuals. Yeah. Oh well. We did what we did.
We did what we did. And I can't wait to eat the food in the break room that I have for myself.
Yeah. All right, well, we really put her back.
Well, like, I'm not going to die. You could say no and I'd be like, okay.
That right there, great
Yeah.
example where we're just,
Yeah.
It doesn't have to get to the point where you would die without it.
Yeah.
For it to be worth you eating the food, even at a time somebody else might not like, which it's not that I don't like it, but even if it was, like, we don't need it to be an emergency before it's okay.
Right. But if you said 5 more minutes, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine.
I wish you would.
What?
I wish you'd be like, no, I'm gonna go eat.
Oh, okay. Well,
Or had eaten on the stream.
But I could have taken my own advice and eaten on the stream. I didn't. Anyway, thank you all. Good to be with you. We'll be here same time next week. You'll need to be here?
Yeah.
All right. See you next week. Monday, 1 to 2 p.m. Central. Maybe 3, I guess.
Yeah, I'm like, it's 3:02.
Goodbye.